a taste of dinner from there.
Oh, yeah. I do that too.
Phew. And are we live?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just underestimate. Remember that, Chris?
Okay, good morning. As we get ready to broadcast to the world, we're starting already. So it is Wednesday, March 15th, 2023, highs of March for some people. And we are continuing our work on S100, the housing bill. And we have back in the committee, thank you for coming back and adjusting to our schedule. Representative Scott Campbell, who's sponsor of a bill of interest to this committee and on a topic of interest to this committee. So be direct about it since time is short. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to look at this, evaluate it, and perhaps include it as it addresses energy consumption by housing. With that, Representative Campbell, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Representative Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury for the record. I'm here to talk about an effort to improve energy code compliance, something I've been working on since I first got here, really. You all are probably aware that we have energy codes, and in fact, they are mandatory. We've had residential codes since 1997 and commercial codes since 2007. They're mandatory, but there's no central administration, and hence no enforcement. Building codes are generally administered and enforced by the Division of Fire Safety and the Department of Public Safety. And energy codes are promulgated and updated by the Public Service Department. Public Service Department has no enforcement capability, and Division of Fire Safety has no energy expertise or capability. So we have this sort of silo problem that has been stymied, providing builders and designers with a central place to go for code administration and adjudication of conflicts whenever conflicts arise between different codes. So one of my first encounters when I got here several years ago was with a builder who was the president then of the Home Builders Association, who was anxious to get code enforcement sort of on the agenda, because his point was he and his colleagues in the Builders Association follow energy codes, but they're competing against some builders who don't. So the playing field isn't level. So I've been working on different strategies to advance this over the years. This bill that is now in House General and Housing, it would just set up a study committee that would force or let's not use that word. That would ask.
Give an opportunity.
The Division of Fire Safety and Public Service Department and stakeholders, architects, builders, energy efficiency utilities, and others with expertise to get in a room and sort of figure out how we're going to solve this problem, how we're going to get some central administration. In the code, there's this phrase, authority having jurisdiction, which is referred to as who you go to for questions about codes, but there is no authority with jurisdiction named. So this H332 would just set up a study committee, a summer study committee, to make recommendations for legislation for next year to do this.
And by the way, I met with Chair Stevens, and he was supportive of the idea of us moving this along, seeing great synergies between affordable housing, truly affordable housing, and having it be energy efficient. So we're not in terms of decorum and who's moving what and how. This is like a friendly relationship between Senate and House. If we move in America, we would love to see us. I think Senator.
Yes, excellent. I was going to mention that as well.
Senator White.
Thank you, Chair Bright. And thank you for that clarification on procedure. So we've had study committees on this in the past. If you could just,
Informal study.
yeah, could you describe what's happened up to this point?
Yeah, so I think it was 4 years ago over the summer, I convened an informal and unfunded study committee, a volunteer study committee, to address how to basically code compliance issues. We had a series of 4 meetings. Not quite over this call. I'm not contagious.
I know,
I tested.
I need some water. Yeah.
No, I'm fine. So anyway, yeah, so we did convene a study committee a few years ago. We did come up with some recommendations for legislation, one of which was builder registration, which we got done last year, happily. And this is another piece of it. So so this would set up a formal study committee with staff. There is an appropriation in the bill of $125,000 to retain staff to facilitate this and really get something done. So another dimension needs to be mentioned here is there's funding available from the feds just for this purpose, to help states improve energy code compliance. There was a funding announcement in December, or no, December, that required a sort of a letter of intent, a concept paper by the end of January, which Energy Futures Group, which is the consultant that has worked on energy codes since we've had them, prepared a response for. And of course, there's a requirement to get state agencies to sign on. Private consultants can file the concept paper, but we need to get state office. The Division of Fire Safety and Department of Public Safety and Public Service Department declined to sign on.
Yes.
But we did get the Secretary of State's office, so we have a state office. Anyway, the concept paper was accepted. They're now preparing a full application, which is due, I think, at the end of next week.
Okay.
And so we'll see whether we get some funding. That funding would be, I think, up to $4 million over a course of several years. That would really help get this started.
Thank you, Chair Bray. So I appreciate you explaining how this is not duplicative of previous work that we've done, because that's a concern that I've heard raised. I like your language. I like this bill quite a bit. I so appreciate your longstanding work in this, both in the field and in the House. But I do think if there's a way that we can call out to fund this in the instant that there is grant funding rather than a straight appropriation for it, that would be something that would make me feel more comfortable with putting it in S100. And I don't know how that would be worded. It sounds like there are potential opportunities.
Yeah, I think we'll know more. Well, by the end of the session. I don't know how long it will take DOE to figure this out.
Would you feel like the intent of your bill, if there was language added for the funding piece, if there is available grant or blah, blah, blah funding, would that take away from the intent of your bill?
Well, it would, because I think the intent of the bill is to get moving on this issue. So energy codes have been getting more stringent over time, and they're going to continue to get more stringent. We're on a trajectory to get to a net zero ready base code by 2030. And meanwhile, compliance rates are drifting down. The last survey that was done, I think, was in 2017, at which time, if I remember the numbers right, 54%, there was 54% compliance with residential energy codes and 87% compliance with commercial codes. It makes sense that commercial codes would be followed more stringently or more sort of religiously, because they typically involve design professionals like architects and engineers whose licenses are on the line if they don't follow codes. So anyway, as codes get more stringent, it's going to get to be more important that we have a compliance mechanism.
The other thing that occurs to me is like a happy timing opportunity is that when we talk about affordability, the long-term affordability is enhanced by making those investments up front. From work in the field, what you know, so first, it's incredibly more expensive to come back and retrofit compared to build well, especially on the weather sealing side.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So, perhaps to Senator White's point there, when we sent S5 through approach, they did add like a sentence that called on the state to maximize the ability, its ability to receive federal funds to support that work. So maybe we can cover both bases by just being explicit that as a group goes forward, for instance, one of the things that I do is if you're already anticipating it, but we can make it more explicit, might buy more comfort. That we're looking to bring in as much support. We have a unique moment of federal funds available, so it's great for us to get out and get working.
I should mention that after the concept paper was accepted, more contact was made with Commissioner Morrison at Public Safety and Commissioner Tierney at Public Service to reconsider supporting the application. And I think that is in process now. They're talking about it. I don't know where that's at the moment.
All right, great. It's always helpful to work in concert with administrative areas.
Yeah.
I think we are, well, we've been frustratingly slow to make progress in this, so but we're trying to lean in. It's very appropriate, especially right now. Okay, well, great. I've asked our counsel, Helen Chakowski, drafted, correct?
Yes.
To come, but we'll have copies of the bill and that she'll be ready to speak to it at a technical level. And we'll walk through it, see if the committee's comfortable with supplementing the housing work with some work aimed at code compliance as well. Great.
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I hope it works. And from my conversation with Chair Stevens, just as Senator Grace said, you would be fine with having it come from both directions, and we'll see what happens.
Right. Synergy, that's the word for today.
Synergy.
Great. Well, thank you very much for hanging with us and coming in a very timely way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Any more questions for Representative King? Okay. So we will, today's day of moving on. Thank you. Good to see you again.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
So our next, we're switching forward, we're going to hear from Mr. Green from the Racial Equity Policy and Research. With the Office of Racial Equity. Good morning, Mr. Green.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. I think it's your first time in our committee in person, so.
Yes, I think so.
Thanks for coming over. Sorry, we don't have snacks on it. Well, we have pistachios. That's just.
I appreciate that, but I did bring my own snacks.
All right.
Wise person.
Aren't really everyone's breakfast treat.
And we're working with this, I don't need to go online.
Correct. That should be the final. Could you second the second letter? Great, thank you. Okay. Well, let me introduce myself for the record. Jay Green, Office of Racial Equity, Policy and Research Analyst. I use they, them pronouns, and I believe that Executive Director of Racial Equity, Susanna Davis, has joined us by Zoom.
Guardian angel right over your shoulder there.
Yes.
Good morning, Ms. Davis.
Gotta get it right.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. So thank you for the opportunity, first of all, for the Office of Racial Equity to provide testimony on S100. We have, our perspective is that we need to consider how to make housing more affordable in Vermont for people who want to move here. Vermont is likely to be a place of refuge for internally displaced persons, which are people from the United States who are moving around the United States and fleeing the effects of climate change, including rising sea levels, droughts, and flooding. Vermont is ideally placed in climates, in terms of climate, to accept people moving from other places. And if the past few years of demographic trends are any indicator, the population growth in Vermont is likely to also be more racially diverse and more ethnically diverse than the current population of the state. Racial and ethnic diversity has been growing in Vermont for the past 10 years, and we firmly support more diversity in the state as being good for the economy. I have some research on the amount that immigrants and new Americans or refugees contribute to the economy, if you are interested in seeing that. So I wanted to point out a couple of specific pieces of language that the Office of Racial Equity supports in this bill. Specifically, we're in support of some of the language that reduce the ability of local bylaws to penalize hotels for providing housing assistance for people experiencing homelessness. So that's, I'm working off of draft 1.1. So that was page 4, lines 7 through 11, I believe. So we wanted to point out, and there's also a section in 24 VSAs or 4412 1H. Those are the regulations relating to provisions, relating to zoning bylaws for hotels. So the office supports regulatory powers that reduce the chance that stigma against people experiencing homelessness will affect state programs that are designed to provide them with shelter.
The page number again, I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. It's page 4, lines 7 to 11, I believe. So wanted to mention that we support that. In the full draft of S100, oh, I'm sorry.
No, sorry, I didn't know. You got to page number 4. Page 4, right? Sorry, I didn't hear it. I was trying to make sure I had it.
But you're talking, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Well, and you're talking, oh, okay. We've moved on. We're not talking about homeless shelters anymore. Or are we?
Would you like to talk about more?
No, that's fine.
Or,
I was just noticing that the page 4 is not, it's not the homelessness part. That's fine.
Oh, pardon me. You've moved on to a different draft.
Yes.
Or have I misquoted the page number?
No, I think we're using a draft that we no longer, we have a different draft, so
It happens, absolutely.
page 4, the top of the page, line 1 through 5 is what you're referring to. With the motel, hotel not having a specific
Yes.
penalty. There is an additional provision around not penalizing emergency shelters, which is also in a different section of the bill, but yes, your bit is higher up on the page.
Yes.
Yep.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. You might do a little translating, that's okay.
Yeah, so we're in support of the language that and we're also in support of the language that you mentioned related to emergency shelter operation, which is currently on a different page. It's no longer on page 7, line 14, but or page 8, line 23. But I also wanted to point out that we support the funding allocations in the full draft as introduced. In the bill as introduced in sections 27 through 39, but we wanted to specifically point out our support for the allocation of $150,000 from the general fund in fiscal year 24 to the Vermont Human Rights Commission to support a housing discrimination litigator position. Our office works closely with the Vermont Human Rights Commission as we are both deeply concerned with matters related to discrimination in the state. In the past, Executive Director of Racial Equity has called for increased oversight of local zoning bylaws by state regulators to ensure that there are no racially inequitable outcomes that are enforced by local zoning bylaws. So we're generally in support of requiring the Department of Housing and Community Development to oversee amendments by local planning commissions to ensure that they meet minimum requirements in the state. And similarly, there may be elements of local housing policy which are subject to disproportionate influence by small groups of people who wish to prevent housing construction out of bias against newcomers to Vermont, because newcomers are statistically more likely to be people of color than the current residents of Vermont. So we wanted to make sure to point that out to the committee, that there's a potential here for the legislature to help combat some of the not in my backyard attitudes that have really prevented a lot of housing construction in Vermont in the past few years. We also wanted to provide support for policies that allow for easier construction of additional accessory dwelling units and multi-family homes that facilitate intergenerational housing, because intergenerational living and communal living is much more common in some other cultures around the world than in kind of white American culture. So making it easier for folks to have the family structures that they prefer and that are supportive and caring for them is a good thing in our view. And I believe that Susanna wanted to jump in and take over for the last portion of our testimony. Susanna, do you want to?
Sure. Before we move on, any questions for Mr. Green? Okay, great, thank you. Ms. Davis, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. For the record, Susanna Davis, Racial Equity Director for the state. Thank you, Jay. I just wanted to close today by sharing with the committee that clearly we've been doing a lot on Act 250. We've been revisiting it every year, certainly every biennium. I remember, I think when I first started doing one of my earliest bouts of testimony on a bill that I think had resulted from the 50 years or next 50 years report. So this is clearly a years-long endeavor. I know that right now the legislature is waiting on a report from the board, and I'm looking to have us pan out a little bit more about the broader context, the process through which we do this policymaking, especially around zoning and land use. And I just want to make sure that we're all reminded and urged to think about the broader, not just short-term, but the long-term process as well. For example, we spent a lot of time thinking about whether to recommend to this body that they wait for that report or take action that could and probably should be taken now. And this is something that comes up very often in racial equity. We have a deep sense of urgency to do the work and to do it quickly, but we also want to make sure that we're doing it right. And part of doing it right means that we're well informed and that we have all of the information we need at our disposal. So understanding the broader context that we have had past reports in recent years on this, we have reports that we're waiting on coming up on this. It's important to us. And again, we're an office that has touch points with 32 working groups on the state and counting. And so we're asked to write a lot of reports for you. We choose to believe that you all read them, but part of the inclusive culture that we want to create on state commissions, committees, working boards, panels, councils, is knowing that when we're asked to do work, and often these are volunteers getting paid maybe $50 a meeting, but when they're asked to do that work, that it's considered and waited for and included in policy making, and that we don't upstream their process. Because I think that would have an impact that would discourage people's participation on working groups in the future if they saw repeated examples of the legislature either not waiting for their processes to be completed or not seeing their work meaningfully included in our policymaking. So I wanted to make sure that we made that point. I do think that there's a lot that we can do here today now regarding S100. And I also want to encourage this body to keep open the line and the possibility that once we get further information and as we keep learning, that we're willing to come back and revisit some of this and not just call it just to revisit our last testimony together, done and dusted. So I just wanted to add that piece in. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time.
Okay, well, thank you. We've been wrestling exactly with this whole question of it. There's two reports coming back. ACCD is looking at the designation program, and NRB is leading work on possible Act 50 reform that, as you rightly point out, goes all the way back to the Act 250 Next 50 Years Commission, which Senator McCormick served. So, and then we're also feeling the urgency of people saying that there is a housing crisis right now. How do we respond? So the way we're approaching it is that there are provisions in the bill that we are planning on sunsetting, which will compel us to, we're trying to accelerate housing development now, but putting sunset 3 years out so that there will be time at which we will stop and reassess what we've learned from the reports. There's also another section that we're talking about Sun Rising post-report, and that is on enhanced designations, which is the ability of interested municipalities to play a larger and more leading role in doing land use planning and development work. So that's our working construct, is to have a sunset that compels revisiting provisions, but lets us take timely action now. And a sunrise provision that says, don't go ahead on some of this work until you've got those reports in hand, because it would make no sense to, for instance, stand up an enhanced designation program, and within months you would have the NRB proposing new structures on how they work, or ACCD proposing new structures on how they're going to work with communities. So we appreciate exactly this balance between act now, but also, frankly, it's just not, I think it's neither good governance nor respectful to ask others outside the legislature to do work to help us learn more, and then fail to use that work meaningfully as we continue our own work in the building.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with that. And also, I think that we also have to consider the nature of what we asked. I find that there are times that we will ask for a report that maybe it's really substantive, maybe it's not. And there are some who use that as a stalling tactic. And that's what we don't want to see. It's really common in our space for people to say, well, what's the impact on different communities? We don't have the data, let's defer. And what that ends up doing is basically saying, these numbers are hard to get. Let's spend time trying to get them, despite the fact that we know enough now to do something. So I appreciate that you all want to walk that balance. I think it's going to be really important to consider what is the nature of the report or the anticipated content of what we're waiting for, and is that something that is going to be critical to our ability to create or improve policy today.
Sarah McClellan.
Are you suggesting particular sections of the bill that ought to be deleted? You made a disturbing observation, but are there parts of the bill that you think we should take out of it?
Senator, this is tough. I think that the items that are in there that we like, definitely leave them in. Are there pieces that should be taken out? I don't think that I want to offer anything right now that I think should be taken out. However, what I do just want to say is that the best people to answer that are going to be the most directly impacted communities. So I'm just going to renew our call to continue to hear, not just from people like me who are comfortably in an office next door to you, but people who are actually struggling to create or retain housing. I know that's an unsatisfactory answer, but if we do think of something, we'll be sure to let you know.
It's your answer. That's so satisfactory. Okay, thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. So any more committee questions, comments, discussion with Ms. Davis? Or Green? Okay. Thank you so much. Good to see you both, and thanks for the, thanks for calling out the details with page numbers and cross references. So even though we have multiple drafts, we can trace them all down and stay in sync with time. Thank you again.
I just wanted to mention that
Yes,
I usually go by the gender neutral title mix instead of Mr., but it's really fine. It's not a big deal.
Mixed green.
Mix, yeah. And
Yes.
Right.
some people in Britain apparently pronounce mux, which I think is also kind of fun.
Okay, I'm going with.
I think that's kind of cool.
Mux green.
Well,
Anyway,
thank you.
not
Thanks.
a big deal.
Thanks for the helpful correction. So my apologies for not quite, I'm on the learning curve.
I don't always correct people because it's sometimes feels like it would deviate things a little bit, but I appreciate the opportunity to show a little bit of what gender diversity can look like in a legal setting where you choose a different title. for
Yeah,
honor.
well, and I appreciate you speaking up about it, so thank you. Okay. With that, then we are scheduled to hear from Mayor Weinberger, who's been in touch with the committee, and I think we was in planning to zoom in as of last evening.
So he's been sent a Zoom,
Okay,
he's been sent an email, and I called, and his office voicemail box is full.
Oh,
So
huh,
I don't know what else I can do.
well,
okay.
right now.
It's you.
So we'll see if we get a reply back on that. Hopefully we catch I think the mayor had, he's talked about a broader concept, municipal delegation. And which is interesting, reminds me a little bit of what we contemplate in the enhanced designation, where there's sort of step up to a standard and then you take over administering land use and planning by virtue of having met that standard. So, however, since he's not here yet, I'll just fill in the blanks from my perspective. It's beyond the scope of what we have time to consider, and I told the mayor about our tight timeline for considering big new ideas, regardless of their merits. And so I have suggested to him that the bill will be going to the House, and there'll be a chance to do more time there to be able to introduce the concept. We'll see what comes back. So not judging one way or the other whether we might see it in the ultimate version of S100 or not. Then I think meanwhile he had some point edits. I'd ask if you have point edits to the bill we do have, and it's likely to be going out, we offer those as well. So I don't see a reply to that text, and given that we okay, now I have this reply. Okay, I am ready, but I don't see a link.
Tell him to check his email, mayor at or send me another email.
Okay.
No.
Yes, I have a book. And does some very poignant related commentary about our whole conversation today, so,
Oh, really?
yes.
To me about energy, this code enforcement.
When is the lifeboat full? Exactly 1 second after you get on board. And it talks about how any Vermonter shows up, basically. It's very good.
So who is the new?
We're gonna find out.
Oh, we don't know yet.
Well, you do, but you don't. But it's basically saying that there's this long evolved thing where when Vermonters come to Vermont, they go, shut the door. You got it, we're full. Great.
Yeah.
And it's
Nobody
just got
else.
this great quote, right? It's just, I'm loving it. I'm so invested in this book. I read way more than I should have last night. But a similar mentality afflicts the people of the Northland, each of whom has secured a spot in the lifeboat. That's it, that's enough. Let's cast off before we are scuttled by the raging herd. Best that some survive rather than we all perish. That is so. You gotta check it. But it really talks about the Flatlander Chucks thing, which is exactly to what your point is. Chuck screen.
Flatlander, we don't, so it's people from away.
People were like,
And their letter is coming in.
Okay, so we sent to a different address and here we go. The wonders of modern devices.
Information is still key.
There is, good morning, Mr. Mayor. Glad you can join us and glad we sorted out having the link go to a different email. So now we're all squared away. As you know, we're working on S100 while we were getting the connection squared away. I gave the committee just a quick preview, but you had sort of a larger construct to talk about as well as edits to S100. And with that, the floor is yours, so take it away.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Senator Bray, am I coming through clearly?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Yes, thank you for the opportunity to weigh in this morning. I appreciate the work that that this committee is attempting to do under real time pressures to take S100, which is a bill that I support, and I'm certainly supporting the overall goal of creating more housing opportunities. This is something that is desperately needed. I appreciate the work that this committee is doing to try to make it even better. Let me just start by conveying how urgent this situation is in the city of Burlington. We, on any given night, have we estimate about 70 people who are unsheltered, sleeping outside. We have a vacancy rate in Chittenden County that has been too low for decades. It is currently under 1%. We've seen a 35% increase in housing prices just since 2019. This is an issue that affects so many families, individuals, and businesses. It is an acute problem. This is a crisis that has been growing for decades, but it is truly in an acute stage right now on the heels of the pandemic, which has worsened so many trends. So, and fundamentally, this is an issue that is a supply issue. And I think there's been a broad growing understanding of this, that the only way out of this crisis is to build a lot more homes, create a lot more housing opportunities. And I see this bill as an attempt, certainly an attempt to do that. As it currently stands, I think that unfortunately, the bill's impact on Burlington and on other Chittenden County municipalities will be modest. It certainly, there is very little in the bill that goes beyond what has already either been implemented in the city of Burlington, for example, elimination of parking requirements, or that is currently in the works. We are creating a neighborhood code right now, something we started working on last year, that would essentially do what this bill seeks to do, with requiring a greater density in all housing districts. And the fact that if this bill passes, I think it will give some wind in the sails of that effort, but it isn't really a structural change. It isn't really a game changer with respect to housing in Chittenden County and certainly in Burlington. The concept that I have been discussing with the chair, and which we did discuss with your colleagues at the Economic Development Committee, it would be a game changer. It would be a structural change. It would say that we are going to get rid of this very problematic current situation, which we see as the single greatest barrier to housing creation in regulation right now, which is this double review of projects that have to go through in a city like Burlington, a comprehensive local zoning review that looks at probably 95% of what Act 250 looks at, and then go through an Act 250 process as well. That is an extraordinarily costly and problematic situation for projects to have to go through. This is something that was studied by you some years ago. We'll send the citation to the study. It found that the few projects in Vermont that are able to avoid that kind of review save on average 7 months of time and $50,000 in fees. What that study didn't count is the larger financial savings, which is that every project, and I say this as someone who used to attempt to build homes in Vermont and New Hampshire and New York and Florida, the bigger cost is not the government fees. It is the cost to a builder of defending a permit at an additional discretionary process that involves lawyers, that involves architects, that involves engineers, that involves traffic engineers, historic preservation consultants often, environmental experts. It is an extensive and costly process that if it needs to be duplicated at the state level, it is a more than six-figure impact to any project that needs to go through that again, is looking at almost nothing new. It is something that in the Burlington situation and several other municipalities is redundant and doesn't add public value.
Mr.
Even that, though,
Can I ask a quick question? Thanks so much. I mean, the question I have is, how often can the local permitting gain sort of a rebuttable presumption of compliance with an Act 250 requirement, so that although it may be something assessed twice, the initial work actually lets you check the box once you get to the Act 250 level of a review?
So, Cyber, there is some, you're right, that there is some of that with the way Act 250 is currently set up for several of the criteria, I believe, up to 4 of the criteria. I think maybe some of them partially, 4 of the 10 criteria, you do get some presumption when you go through the state process. You still have to prove that. There is quite a bit involved in defending that presumption, is my memory of it from when I went through the process. And you certainly are going through an additional discretionary process that is very time consuming and costly.
Right. I'm also, I think I'm reading between the lines and hearing you say that the additional review, besides adding cost and time, doesn't deliver any particular greater value to the end product. Am I hearing that right?
That is my that is my personal opinion. That is an opinion, maybe more importantly, of the professional planning staff of the city of Burlington. There is very little new that is reviewed at the Act 250 Commission at considerable public and private cost. Further, even the cost itself, I don't think doesn't come close to fully capturing the impact of the negative impacts of this double layer of review, in that the fact that double review exists has a chilling effect on builders pursuing projects where that double layer of review exists. It cuts against, I think, the state's goals and even the Act 250 goals it becomes another reason that makes downtown development in the areas where I think there's a broad consensus we most want it. It makes it harder to do development in those areas, and there are projects that are never pursued because of the gauntlet, this extensive gauntlet that projects need to pursue there, and it has contributed significantly to this dramatic reduction in housing production since the 1990s. That is the source of the acute housing crisis that we're in now, or a major driver in it at least. So I appreciate the chance to sort of lay out that overarching concern. We came up with a concept. Other mayors have been talking for years about a concept that would address this called municipal delegation, that has precedent within Vermont statute and within statutes that this committee has worked on recently. The Lakeshore Protection bill that was created several years ago created the possibility of municipal delegation for cities that were already regulating heavily their lake shores, or that changed their ordinances to do so. Burlington has taken advantage of that delegation, and I think it's been a positive thing for all parties involved. We at the prior committee proposed this concept, and there was not the ability there to fully review it. And I believe the same is going to happen here today. I understand you need to move this bill out of your committee today, and there won't be the time to seriously consider municipal delegation. It is something we are going to continue to advocate for as this bill goes over to the House side, and that there is, I think, a lot of enthusiasm for out there. So appreciate this chance to sort of put that out there, and you'll be hearing more about it in the weeks and months ahead. The bill does attempt to achieve some of the goals, or really all the goals of municipal delegation, through this new idea of an enhanced designation. And so now, with the rest of my testimony, I do have some specific feedback on the bill that's actually before you, as opposed to this broader concept. And we will follow up this testimony with a written document this morning that has language that would address all these areas if the committee chooses to do so. I've got there are 5 areas that I would like to say a little bit about, and some of these are fairly granular. However, they do speak to larger philosophical. I think they really speak to bigger issues that I appreciate this opportunity to speak to, and I hope the committee will grapple with. First one is the effective date for the enhanced designation process. The change that you came out with yesterday pushed that enhanced designation date, that effective date, back a year to January of 25. I want to make sure the committee fully understands the impact of that and the implications of it. That is just under the current formulation, where this enhanced designation requires the NRB to do a lot of work. It requires the NRB to issue new bylaws. One of the benefits of our proposal, the municipal delegation, is it wouldn't require all that work by the agency. It would allow the city and the NRB today, as soon as this was created, to have a collaborative conversation that attempts to determine whether the city's existing bylaws are in conformance with Act 250. Like I say, in Burlington, we believe we're 95% of the way there. We could have a collaborative conversation about the remaining 5 to 10% of what we need to do to get there. This model instead says the NRB is gonna issue these bylaws before anything can happen with moving towards this enhanced designation. Then the cities will have to do the work to bring their bylaws into conformance. That will be a lengthy period as well. So, you're really talking about probably the first projects being able to apply under this enhanced designation process happening 4, 5, 6 years from now. The way this reads, if it's the beginning of 25 before the model bylaws are even produced, I think that's really inconsistent with where I started, with the acute nature of the housing crisis today. It is really cold comfort to the families in a COTS shelter currently. It is cold comfort to the businesses struggling to hire employees and keep their doors open. to say, 4 or 5 years from now, there's going to be some relief on a project that then is going to take another couple of years to build. So at the very least, I would urge that be returned to the January 1st, 24 deadline. Second point is ensure enhanced delegation allows consideration of other municipal codes and ordinances. This is actually a small point, but an important one. When right now the legislation just says the NRB will consider whether the zoning is consistent with Act 250. We have other local regulations that bring us into conformance that make us comparable to Act 250 that are not in the zoning code, and will be very laborious to have to move everything into the zoning code. So we hope that could be clarified to say, you can look beyond, you can look at other municipal regulations, not just the zoning code, to determine whether there is parity or comparability with Act 250. Third point, I believe, if I'm following things, and it is, I know you guys are working quick, and there may even be a new draft of this bill out beyond what I've seen, I think maybe from work last night or yesterday afternoon. One thing that I believe this committee has done or is contemplating doing is to eliminate the appeals has been to add an appeals process for the enhanced designation process. I would really urge you to reconsider that and to think about what the implication of that is. As I've just described, it is going to be years of governmental work before the city of Burlington, the other municipalities that want to pursue this. You're going to have the state NRB board put through all this model bylaw work. The city is going to do all this work with its local regulations to come into conformance with that, and that's going to take years. And then at the end of that process, what the language we believe currently says is that a single individual who doesn't agree with what the legislature is trying to do here today, what the city has done, what the NRB does, can then appeal that, the existence of that enhanced designation area, setting the creation of this new ability back potentially years further if someone takes that all the way to the Supreme Court. Could be another 2-3 years before this begins to have any impact in Burlington. This I think really cuts against what we need to do, what we are trying to do with our local regulations, and what I think really the state is going to need to do to get serious about our housing challenges. We need to empower state government and local government to make good to deliver for the people of Burlington, to show that we can be effective and actually do something about this housing crisis. Our legitimacy, satisfaction with government comes as much from us being able to effectively make change and deliver on needs as it does from having administrative justice, having good process. I think in many, many areas, we go way too far to try to defend to create process, thinking that the legitimacy and the effectiveness of our laws will come from that additional process, and it comes at the expense of actually being able to deliver benefits for the people of Burlington. So I would ask you to strike that new section entirely. I think it will set this whole thing back very likely. If one person disagrees, as currently written, with what you're trying to do, it will set it back years further. Fourth point, 4 out of 5, almost done. Fourth point is we would ask that the currently priority housing projects have a definition or rely on a definition of mixed use projects within statute. That mixed use lays out a number of uses that can count towards mixed use. It is silent on whether hotels should be considered a legitimate mixed use or not. It doesn't say they can't be. It says industrial uses can't be. And it doesn't put hotels with industrial uses, but it also doesn't specifically list them in the mixture of uses that can be considered. That is the potential to have direct impact on downtown projects that are currently in the planning process, and that change would be very impactful to Burlington right now. Sorry.
Mr. Mayor, so I just want to make sure I got it straight. It's silent on the status of hotels in terms of meeting the mixed use definition. And are you advocating for making hotels explicitly eligible for meeting that criteria?
I am.
Got it. Thank you.
From my perspective as a city official, hotel development has a lot of benefits with very few downsides. It generates a lot of revenue for the city and the state on both the property tax side, as well as the income tax side, as well as the rooms and meals taxes, and the additional public responsibilities created by hotels are very, very modest. So it's something I think we should be seeking to allow as part of a mixed use development. And currently there's not enough clarity there for that to be it's effectively a barrier.
Okay.
The final point is this. The introduction of this new enhanced designation, while it is a positive thing, it also, and I'll supply you a table in the follow-up testimony that may make it clearer than I'm going to be attempt to illustrate it here or describe it. It's going to create some real hard to justify disparities in terms of how projects are addressed. So if in enhanced designated areas, projects up to 25 units, homes, don't need to go through Act 250 review, they will get neither they won't get that review at the local level or at the state level. There will not be this comprehensive review. Then for units over 25, from 25 to 50, I believe, in the Burlington Code, suddenly with the 26th unit, if something doesn't mean the priority housing project designation, but is a housing project, with the 26th unit, that would need to get this, go through the Act 250 process. Whereas a project that has 100 or 200 units that is a priority housing project doesn't have that review. It's hard to defend that when someone flushes the toilet in a priority housing project, a project that's getting government subsidy, that doesn't have any less impact than flushing a toilet in a project, a market rate development. And yet that's what these reviews are supposed to be assessing, that kind of issue. But it's treated very differently. I think what this goes to is another major way out of the housing crisis we're in is we need to recognize that all housing is sacred. All homes are sacred. We need a lot more of all of them. Absolutely, we need more where the rents are restricted, where there's government subsidy that is making them more affordable. But we also need new homes that are serving other areas of the market. And so what I would encourage the enhanced the new rules for enhanced designation areas, that all housing projects be treated like the priority housing projects in those areas. Hope that point is clear. We'll follow up with the written testimony to clarify. So thank you for the chance to lay that all out. Happy to answer further questions if you have.
Thank you, and thanks for hitting the mark on timing too. So while getting to talk about the big picture as well as the finer points. Any committee questions for Mayor Weinberger? Senator Watson.
Thank you. Hello, Mayor Weinberger. I had to step out briefly, so I just wanted to ask about what you've been saying about the January 24th deadline. Hearing you about that the enhanced designation process may take a long time to set up. Are there ways, in your opinion, that we can either speed it up or improve it?
Thank you, Senator, although I still think you of as Mayor Watson.
Yeah.
We are excited to have you, a fellow municipal leader, serving in your current role. Yeah, appreciate the chance to speak to this again, because I think it's among the most important points you have. The way we think that we have proposed, and the written materials that accompany this will lay this all out. Your chair has seen all of these. There's been discussion of this at the prior committee, but municipal delegation, our concept of municipal delegation would accelerate dramatically when the benefits of enhanced designation could be realized, when you would have a greater regulatory relief for housing projects, because the concept of our municipal delegation concept would basically say we're creating a new system where municipalities can go speak directly to the NRB and have a collaborative conversation about whether, what needs to change in the existing ordinances for them to be completely consistent, to be addressing everything that Act 250 is. And in our case, we believe that we already review 95% of what the district commissions review at the Act 250 level. So we could jump right into that conversation about how do we address the remaining 5 to 10%, and then we could work expeditiously to fix that. So I'm pretty confident if you guys pass this if there's a municipal delegation passed this year that allowed us to do that process by January, by sometime in the first half of next year, we should actually have that new system in place where a project would not need to go through this double layer of review. Instead, what the bill currently does is it says we're going to give the NRB until, and this was a change I believe your committee is contemplating from what came out of the prior committee, we're going to give it until January 1, 2025 for the NRB to draft these model bylaws. Only then can the city start to assess whether we are in conformance with those model bylaws and then make the changes to that. So, it will be 26 probably at the earliest before a project could apply under this new enhanced designation process. And that's assuming that there isn't an individual that appeals the creation of that designated area, which could push it back, easily another couple of years beyond that. So, so what I really think the solution is, Senator Watson, is, and we're going to advocate hard for this on the House side, because I know you don't have time to really consider this today, is that we create this municipal delegation that will accelerate this timeline by 3 years or more. 2 more years or more. But what you could do today, and what I think would be important to do today, is to go back to what your colleagues at the prior committee had and have the date by which the NRB needs to issue these new laws be January 1 of 24, not January 1 of 25. That at least saves a year in the process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just by way of a public explanation, I think you and I talked about it a little bit, is the enhanced designation program we drafted in committee a year ago. So we didn't have at that point on the table, at least not that I'm aware of, a municipal delegation construct. I think the goals for both are very similar, but the implementation path is a little different. And we're certainly not interested in having a slow process. I think what we were aiming for at that point was there was no alternative, and we were trying to get a well-crafted set of bylaws that then would have sort of statewide application and with sort of a one and as close to one and done as we could, but I appreciate the fact that given the urgency everyone's feeling around housing, that a construct that takes several years to develop completely isn't a very satisfactory answer. So I'm glad that you're gonna pursue it on the House side. We talked about that. It's an entirely friendly gesture, and we'll look forward to seeing what comes back when there's more time to square up the different proposals on the table, and look for a more timely solution to something everyone wants to get to. Senator McCormick.
Mr. Mayor, and former constituent, you and several other witnesses have spoken of appeals in terms of that they have the effect of impeding or slowing down the process for a new project. But it seems that the unspoken undertext there is that the appeals are actually lacking in merit. That what is being appealed probably shouldn't be appealed at all. That it's which I'm wondering, are you asserting that that appeals do not serve a good purpose?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, I do still have a lot of Heartland in me, even though I get to work up here now, and it's exciting there too. Windsor County senators on this committee. It's one of the reasons I was eager to testify today. Let me be really clear. I do think that appeals in general, we need to do something about. I think, Vermont, one of the things that has distinguished Vermont and makes us so different from so many states is that we look to Europe in a lot of ways for a precedent in many areas, and we the kind of the social kind of safety net that Europe has, we aspire towards and have really built out here. I think we need to look to Europe more on land use as well. They have, and this is a big project and not one that is in general before you right now, but there is one piece of it that is. I do think we need to get our infrastructure done, to move to do the dramatic overhaul of society, of our economy that we need to electrify everything and combat the climate emergency, to deal with this housing crisis. We are going to need to find a way to empower our government agencies, our state and local government agencies, to deliver on this change. And when I do think our appeals, which I understand where they come from, I think they are in tension with government being able to act and deliver benefits for the people of Vermont. What I'm specifically calling out for you here, Senator, though, is the changes you just put in. We create an entirely new appeal right and a new kind of type of appeal right, which is an appeal not just to whether a project meets the laws or not. You're saying the whole concept of this enhanced designation can be appealed. So after you have gone through all the trouble of creating, that we're doing right now, of creating this new concept, and the municipalities do the work to be in conformance with that, and the NRB does all the work to review that and says that, yes, in fact, this is consistent with what we want an enhanced designated area to be, then after all that work, all the staff time, all of those, the expense of that, public expense of that, a single individual can then push that back for years further through this new kind of, and I just, it's as if you would be creating you guys, hopefully you're going to create a new piece of childcare legislation this year that creates new funding for childcare. But we were to say that, but before we actually start sending out monies to start making sure that Vermont children go to get into high quality childcare, anyone in the state can appeal that whole concept of that legislative action. You're allowing an appeal essentially of legislative action here, of the action of the municipality and of this administrative board. And I think I'm not sure there's any other appeal quite like it. Maybe there is. I'm not completely expert here, but it seems to me a unique type of appeal that this new language would create. And it's going to set this bill back years further for implementation.
Last word, comment, question to Senator Watson.
Thank you. Yeah, so just coming back to the date, I just wanted to note that, because I was looking for the 2025 reference that you were talking about. And so it looks like the 2025 reference is in the effective dates at the very end, section 44, that says that the enhanced designation won't take effect until January 1st, 2025. However, in section 21, it says that that the NRB has got to come up with these bylaws by January 1st, 2024. So
I see.
I'm wanting to flag that we should true that up so that it's 2024. Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to have, it takes a village sometimes to pass a bill. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good luck on the House side. We'll look forward to seeing what goes on. We will stay engaged and follow what's happening. And thanks for your contribution today on both levels.
Great. Well, thank you again for, I know it's quite a juggling act you need to do to hear from everyone you need to. I appreciate the chance to be with you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
With that, we are, yeah, so two things coming around. This is a copy of page 332 that we talked about earlier this morning. And I'll ask us to sort of hold on to that one. And then we have a new draft of our committee amendment. And that is draft 2.2, dated 3/15/23, timestamp 9:24 a.m. Good morning, Ms. Sikowski. I don't know if I should say you were well rested or not, but
You don't need to say anything about my appearance, I don't think.
That's right.
Although, yes, good morning, Ellen. Council, the prior date on this amendment was 12 hours ago, so.
it's
Yeah.
fresh work. That's what I really alluded to. So if you could walk the committee through that
Yeah, thank you, sir.
2.2, please.
So which document, which of these many documents are we working with?
Draft 2.2.
So, today what I have brought you are multiple documents. Draft 2.2 is a instance by instance amendment. In order to read it, you will probably need to look at S100 as introduced, because it is not a strike all amendment. Additionally, I have provided a summary document of the amendments that are in this amendment.
Great, thank you.
This draft 2.2 does include H332, so it is in here. So we can either look at the text of H332 or we can just wait until the amendment.
No, thank you for, I wasn't sure if we could catch that in time or not. Thank you for making that happen. And so let's, rather than use the separate bill, we'll use the composite. Thanks for making a step ahead.
So it's an instance by instance of amendment because you're only amending a handful of sections in S100. So on page 1 of draft 2.2, the first instance of amendment amends section 2 of S100. We discussed this yesterday, and it raises the density requirement in residential districts with sewer and water from 4 units per acre to 5 units per acre. And so this hasn't changed from yesterday's draft.
Thank you. And since we are trying to sort of paint ourselves out of the room as a committee and get to a final amendment, I'll just reiterate, when we went through this yesterday, we agreed to that. And so it sounds like we're set on first. Any, am I correct? Okay, so let's keep going. Thank you.
The second instance of amendment strikes out section 6 in its entirety. And this is the section on appeals of municipal planning decisions. So the change is on page 2. So this section is amending 24 VSA 4465. under current statute, any combination of any 10 voters or property owners may appeal a municipal planning decision. S100 as introduced struck this whole section. However, yesterday your committee did discuss changing it. So what it now reads is on page 2, line 14, any 10 persons who allege a common injury to a particularized interest protected by this chapter, who may be any combination of voters or real property owners within the municipality, who allege that any relief requested by a person under this title, if granted, will not be in accord with the policy's terms, purposes and terms of the plan for the bylaw. So this is requiring a common injury among 10 people.
Okay.
You found the right words.
Yes, any comments, questions, et cetera?
10 people in Montpelier is not the same as 10 people in Burlington. Why is there a fixed number instead of a fixed percent from place to place?
I think it's a long-standing construct, the 10-person construct for appealing, and we're amending that to narrow it just to, interested parties with a common injury to a particularized interest. So
It
I,
may be a long-standing construct, but it's been
Right.
my mantra in here over and over again, 10 people, 10 people, 10 people.
Yeah.
If 10 people is less than 0.5% in one town, it's 20% in another town.
I
Those are different issues.
Sure, point taken. In the interest of timeliness, do other committee members want to explore reframing the construct from 10 to some percentage of the population?
Do we use percentage? I know we have to use a percentage of the population to have something put on town, on the ballot,
A referendum?
or a town meeting on the agenda. So let them do it on their own. See what.
well, so- I guess we can ask the
Is that
council.
unique, or is that, or other?
Are there other places in planning law where we use percentage of population?
I don't know.
Senator White.
Thank you, Chair Bray. And to answer your question verbally, no, I would not like to pursue that at this time. But to ask a question, so we had talked this, thank you. Where does the particularized interest,
I don't have an answer.
okay,
It's still vague. I think it is unclear specifically what the particularized interest is here. I will look into it.
okay.
But right now, it's interest protected by this chapter. So the first immediate answer would be procedurally related to any planning that the town does. So those are clearly defined, but beyond that, it is unclear.
Well, I appreciate your work on this, and I think that that's amenable to me as it stands now, but I understand that's a
Sure.
bigger question maybe.
Well, the finessing I'm hoping that we could agree to is that there is the cross-reference to a particularized interest. There is that larger construct of like a section 4302. And the other thought I had is that prior to third reading, if we feel like we want to, as council does more research on it, if we feel like there's a way to tune it beyond the more general, a particularized interest protected by the chapter, we could bring language part of third reading to add that nuance, but the construct itself is sound. That's my take.
Particularized interest, is that far out from Act 250?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, okay, because so exactly what that means, there's a lot of this history.
Well, right, so this language is nearly identical to language that's in chapter 151. However, in chapter 151, it says interest protected by this chapter. The interests in chapter 151, Act 250, are clearly enumerated in the criteria. So I'm just pointing out that this is different because in chapter 117, they aren't necessarily as clearly enumerated.
Right. So with that, are we satisfied with this amendment? Can we go to next? Yes? Wait,
No question, yes.
down?
It's an arbitrary number.
Yes.
It doesn't reflect the community sentiment.
Sure. Okay. Admittedly, arbitrary number with some precedent. So with that, let's go on to the third instance.
The third instance of amendment is starts on page 3. This is the energy code section.
Where
In,
do I look on the as introduced?
it's on page 19. So, the third instance of amendment in section 13 is about energy codes. Effectively, what you have just done in this amendment is delete, the second and third sentences, from it, but I've reproduced it entirely in this amendment so you can see it. So the language as it currently reads in draft 2.2 of the amendment is that any energy codes or regulations adopted after July 1, 2023 by a municipality shall not be more restrictive than the residential energy building standards or the stretch code adopted under statute or the commercial building energy standards, except where enabled by a municipal charter. S100 as introduced included a provision in the second and third sentences which created a process by which municipalities could adopt more stringent energy codes if they received approval from the Department of Public Service, that they followed a process outlined in 30 VSA 51C1 and 2 and 53C3 in the state statute. So you have deleted that process by which the department could approve stricter energy codes.
Right. So I would editorialize that part of the reason that that's gone is that that process didn't exist at the municipal level, a state code process, and that to stand up a new process at this point, including right to appeal, was beyond the scope of what we had to do. So we rely on the existing process, which is municipalities advance their own best thinking through a referendum, and then that if the referendum succeeds, then they proceed to legislation for a charter change. So that's how we ended up with this. So any questions for council on this edit to this? Finway.
Thank you, Chair Bray. I just want to say again, thank you for working on this language. We had discussed it last time, and I know we had considered putting the full return to the original language, and it sounds like we've come to a really good spot with a compromise. So I appreciate that work, and I feel good about it.
So we're in an up-tempo mode here, so I'm just going to check in. Any other questions for council on this one? Show of hands, who would like to adopt this this third instance of amendment? I see 1, 2, 3. Chair McCormick, I don't know if your hand is up, hold glasses or to vote.
I'm undecided.
Undecided, okay. Chair McCall? Undecided.
We're committed to jurisdiction and we're doing stuff because we don't have time. I don't know how we have a system where the committee of jurisdiction doesn't have time to do what its job is.
Well, yeah, there are compromises along the way. So
These compromises are usually on policy.
yes, so there was a reference to a process that doesn't exist at the municipal level. Unless you have a compelling reason to say we should stop and create a new process at the municipal level, when there's already an existing process called referendum and charter change brought to the legislature, then I would say, why would we do that? I mean, it's not that we didn't think about this before. We already have an existing process. We're just saying, let's stick to the existing process rather than try to create something new on the fly.
And Senator McDonald, one of the reasons that I feel comfortable with this language is because when I heard from constituents on energy committees around concerns that they wanted to extend their residential building codes as a municipality, it was to get at some of the energy-based concerns they had. So it doesn't necessarily reflect what the goals of this section were. So I feel that it gives our municipalities an opportunity to follow a process, to look at what is open to them. And then it also doesn't take away, which is what we had originally, any opportunity for them on the local level. So I think it strikes a really good balance between local control and following process. And I respect what you're saying around the time that we were given with this bill, but I still feel that we've come to a meaningful place on it.
Okay, so, majority of the committee approving that instance of amendment, let's go to the fourth, please.
The fourth instance of amendment strikes out section 16 entirely, which is the Act 250 section, and replaces it with a different Act 250 section with different amendments. So first, on page 4 of draft 2.2, under the definition of development, which is the jurisdiction, one of the jurisdictional triggers for Act 250, the existing jurisdictional unit trigger for housing units is 10 or more units. That is remaining intact. However, there's new language at the bottom of page 4, which is highlighted because it is new. So it reads, until July 1, 2026, the construction of housing projects such as cooperative condominiums, dwellings, or mobile homes with 25 or more units constructed or maintained on tract land located entirely within a downtown designated neighborhood development area or growth center owned or controlled by a person within 5 miles within 5 years. Just reading in here, temporary jurisdictional trigger. So within downtowns, neighborhood development areas, and growth centers, a person can construct up to 24 units before triggering Act 250 until July 1, 2026. This is a jurisdictional trigger with a sunset.
Questions, discussions, anyway?
Thanks, Chair Bray. Just a quick question on village centers versus village centers. How does this?
Sure, so, when we've been looking at how step one to step back, the idea was, okay, if you're doing good, we've been saying all along, if you're doing good planning, then we want to support particular priority housing projects or housing projects more broadly. When we look at the criteria that have to be satisfied in order to gain the designations, and looking at the more robust ones include a downtown development district, a designated neighborhood development area, or a designated growth center. Village centers have very little in the way of planning requirements, so we actually come back to that, I think, later in this amendment with an enhanced village center. Basically, if you're a village center and you want to do additional planning that would bring you more up to snuff with these other pre-existing designations, then you would gain a similar ability to do more housing without triggering Act 250.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, so on page 5, there is another new piece of language. So the word development does not include, which means things are exempt. So at the bottom of page 5, new subdivision 3, notwithstanding any other provision of law to the contrary, until July 1, 2026, the construction of a priority housing project located entirely within a downtown or growth center.
So my comment based on our discussions yesterday and the request then to council for drafting was we are aware of, talked a little bit about this morning. There's the jurisdictional triggers report, there's the work of the NRB, there's the work of ACCD on designations. Since we asked for that work and wanted to be able to revisit current programs at the law, taking advantage of that work that we've asked others to provide, saying, okay, let's, we know that work's coming, we want to be able to use it. We also know there's an urgency to get something done now. So we open basically a 3-year window to go ahead. The sunset provides requirement for a future legislature to pause and say, do we want to continue this? Or now that we have those reports in hand, do we want to amend? This is really a thou shalt look at those reports provision while meanwhile supporting accelerated development. Okay. Any committee questions or discussion on that one? Senator McDowell.
So what is it that the sunset permits to happen?
Until 2026, there is no cap on the number of priority housing projects that will be exempt from Act 250 in a downtown or growth center.
Can you secure, so what? You know, I got a bunch of land, can I take advantage of this and apply for it, get a permit between now and 26, and not do anything with it, just sit there with on the permit for 10 years?
No, so a permit that isn't used, so if you took no steps to use your permit, a permit is considered abandoned after 3 years of no construction.
After what?
3 years of no construction.
Then what happens? It evaporates?
Yes.
Notwithstanding any provision statute yet to be passed that says notwithstanding.
Under present law.
Are you asking me to speculate whether the future legislature would consider extending abandoned permits into perpetuity?
Well, if I were to get a permit to do these things and decided I didn't want to do them for a couple of years, but now I got the permit, I can sell that to somebody or exercise it myself later. So legislature says no, has my permit been rendered invalid or what?
I guess I don't understand your question. So what's happening?
Well, I don't understand what.
So this is an exemption.
Yeah.
So there wouldn't be a permit for these priority housing projects.
Yep.
There would be a jurisdictional opinion stating that they were exempt.
But at least until 26.
Yes. Thereafter, if the provision sunsets and is not renewed, it would fall under, I think, what we have already in statute, which is the substantial change to an unpermitted project would trigger Act 250 jurisdiction. So if you have a project that is sub-jurisdictional, doesn't have Act 250 jurisdiction, but then they make a change to the project, that it would need to be a substantial change to then trigger Act 250, at which point you would potentially need a permit. So just because something is, as far as I am, as I was working through the legal intricacies of adding a sunset to a jurisdictional trigger, I do think that if there was no longer this exemption in the future, future changes to a project would potentially bring it under Act 250 jurisdiction.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
So can I add one more thing? Currently under statute, there is no cap on priority housing projects in the largest towns. So towns with a population greater than 10,000, which does cover, I didn't check, but I think all of the centers and most of downtowns.
Yeah, I don't support Act 250 exemptions. The underlying the situation that this language is about is sunsetting an exemption. I don't support the exemption in the first place, but if the committee, in its wisdom, chooses to advocate for an exemption, then I would support having it sunset.
Okay.
Yes, we have no interest.
Yes. Okay. I'm gonna try to parse that one in this context. All right, so can you help remind the committee again, what we're just reiterating that there
So
is no cap
under current law,
under current law.
for towns with greater than 10,000 people for a priority housing project. Guess I should probably look, but there are only 6 growth centers and there are 23 designated downtowns. So I suspect that the number of towns we're talking about here is quite limited because they already have the unlimited priority housing projects.
And we have another construct coming our way that addresses many other locations, the enhanced village center. Okay, so that is the, that's what we have at the moment. Any further discussion on that one?
For the record, if you'll take it.
Sure, Mr. Commissioner, we're not generally gonna do this while we're hashing out, but please.
There's many designated downtowns that do not reach that population level, including Middlebury.
Yes.
And this doesn't include neighborhood development areas, which is where planning for more housing growth is most present in the designation programs.
Right, NDAs are not in. It does, the cap is off regardless of population. So Middlebury would be allowed to proceed under this project. But to the point of there are other planning designations that are omitted, given that there are a limited number of designated downtowns and growth centers. Can we look at, please, the enhanced village centers, and then we can come back and approve or disapprove of these. I think probably it's good to look at them side by side and consider them side by side. If you could walk us through the 5th instance, please.
The 5th instance of amendment is on page 6 of draft 2.2. It is an entirely new concept. I probably should have put it in yellow, but you have not seen this language before. So page 6 is adding a new section 17. It's striking out the prior section 17 from S100, which included 2 pieces of language related to the Act 250 exemption section. And it's inserting this new concept of enhanced village centers. So it's amending 24 VSA 2793A, which is where in current law, the village center designation is created, and it's adding a new subsection to it. So a village center designated by the state board pursuant to subsection A of the section is eligible to apply to the state board to receive an enhanced designation. This enhanced designation allows a priority housing project with 50 or fewer units located entirely within a village center to be exempt from Act 250. To receive enhanced designation under this subsection, a village center shall have a duly adopted permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws, municipal sewer and water infrastructure, and adequate municipal staff to support coordinated, comprehensive, and capital planning, development review, and zoning administration. Section 17A then again reiterates the Act 250 exemption, so on the top of page 7. Notwithstanding any other provision of law to the contrary, until July 1, 2026, no permit or permit amendment is required for a priority housing project with 50 or fewer units that is located entirely within a village center that has received enhanced designation. This is again a temporary provision.
And thinking that came out of the yesterday's discussion was, is there a way outside of the designated downtowns and growth centers to provide an opportunity for priority housing projects that would be a significant number, 50, and be sub-jurisdictional to triggering Act 250. Mr. Kowski, can you, I don't know if you know this number off the top of your head, do you know how many village centers we currently have?
More than 200.
So I think this was an effort to offer an opportunity for those 200 village centers to participate in accelerated housing development the concern the committee's had all along is we keep saying we want to support housing development. We also want to do it when there is an assurance of adequate planning and infrastructure to support it. So that's why we have this sub 2 with the 3 provisions: permanent zoning and division, subdivision bylaws, municipal sewer and water infrastructure, and adequate municipal staff to support coordinated comprehensive capital planning, development review, and zoning administration. So again, it's a new construct. So it's a best effort to be responsive to the state more broadly outside the designated areas in instance number 4. Okay. Senator Watson.
Thank you. I want to appreciate that. I think we want towns to go towards adopting bylaws for zoning. And so, hoping that this is an enticing carrot to, hopefully more towns will adopt zoning. I just want to note that I suspect a lot of places that have village centers may not have municipal water and sewer infrastructure. So that may be a prohibitive thing there. And I think that's something that maybe the House could look at.
I would just like to point out
Yes, please.
that in that S100, this amendment is not amending the enhanced designated area, which has been added in S100. Now you're adding enhanced village centers. Under the construct in S100, there could be enhanced village centers with different requirements. So I just want to say that that's a little confusing.
Sure, and I mean, it has awkwardness of drawing both what they have in common is an effort to be responsive to requests to have more municipal autonomy. In both cases, the response is an effort to say, we want to provide that autonomy as long as we have some assurance that there's an adequate level of planning and capacity to do the work. That they're going up side by side as proposals in the bill. I wouldn't say it's the most elegant solution, but they are directed at slightly different audiences. So personally, I'm content to say it's not the most elegant solution, but it's a genuine offer to address a need that's been articulated.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Excuse my ignorance, but when we're talking about the designation of these new village centers, does that mean the state designates them or the villages apply to be recognized as having designated themselves?
Currently under statute, there's a process by which a town applies for designation to the state board, and the board approves their application.
So the board, the urban areas designated and, as opposed to approved, or does the state have the authority to designate a town to be this new area absent the town's application?
No, the town has to apply.
So first you go through the normal village center application process, gain that designation. You can then also apply to receive the enhanced designation if priority housing projects are something of particular interest to your municipality.
And the board in question is
State Downtown Development Board.
All right. So, council, is there anything else in this section that we're related to PHP, priority housing projects that we have? No. Okay, so we go on to instance 6 of the amendment. So I'd like to then back up because we looked at but didn't take a committee position on the 4th instance of amendment. And let's do 4 and 5 since they really go hand in hand. So let me poll the question informally. All those in favor of supporting the fourth instance of amendment, please indicate
Which
yes.
is,
Yeah, I can take
page
it to
four.
oh, well,
The sixth instance is the village center language.
Okay, so, pardon me,
I'm opposed.
okay. And Senator Dunn. Okay, so committee position is 3-2 for that amendment. Let's go on to the next one, please. Yes. And that brings us then to the fifth instance of amendment that appears on page 6 of today's draft 2.2. Saying all of those in favor of adopting this amendment for the committee reports, okay, by saying aye or raising their hand.
Aye.
Okay, so we have 3, Senator McCormick,
Opposed.
opposed, Senator McDowell.
Folks, I don't have trouble keeping up.
Okay. So, majority of the committee having approved, let's go on to, please, the sixth instance of amendment.
The sixth instance of amendment strikes sections 24 and 25 of S100, which were the language related to the wastewater permit, connection permits. It strikes that language and instead inserts the language from H332. So H332 is the Building Energy Code Study Committee. So on page 7 of draft 2.2, this is a finding section. The General Assembly finds that Vermont established the residential building energy standards in 1997, the commercial building energy standards in 2007. The Public Service Department is responsible for adopting and updating these codes regularly, but does not have the capacity to administer or enforce them. The RBs and the CBs are mandatory, but while municipalities with building departments handle some aspects of review and inspection, there is no state agency or office designated to interpret, administer, and enforce them. The Division of Fire Safety in the Department of Public Safety is responsible for development, administration, and enforcement of building codes, but does not currently have expertise or capacity to add administration or enforcement of energy codes in buildings. On to page 8. Studies in recent years show compliance with the RBs at about 54% and CBs at about 87%, with both rates declining. Both codes are scheduled to become more stringent with the goal of net zero ready by 2030. Without strategies to improve administration and increase compliance, rates are likely to decline further. In December 2022, the Department of Energy issued the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, Resilient and Efficient Code Implementation Funding Opportunity Announcement. The first $45 million of a 5-year, $225 million program is available in 2023. Vermont's increased code compliance plans should include contingencies for this potential funding. Just like to stop and say that finding sections are supposed to be verifiable, fact-based. I think a couple of the things in there are more opinion-based, so I want to consider that. That's just an FYI.
Okay, and let's pause while we're there. What would you flag as more, I'm looking at that last sentence, Vermont's increased code compliance plan should include contingency for the compliance plan. Is this the opinion?
Well, no, that's a recommendation. I mean, I think I don't have any, line 4 on page 8, I mean, I can't necessarily point to a source that says that. If someone has a source that says that, someone could get me a source, that would be fine, but I don't have a source that says that.
Right.
So, also, potentially the language on the prior page, the Senate doesn't usually do findings, so I don't know if you wanted to, I did not know if you wanted to include all of this because this is the language from H332.
In this case, because it helps make the amendment, which is going to be a new concept for some people, I've been working on it here for 10 years, but maybe to our colleagues, I think the findings will be helpful. In terms of the opinion that's expressed on page 8, lines 4 and 5, I would suggest we just strike that sentence. We already, the prior sentence indicates, 2 sentences prior, we indicate that both rates are declining. That's helpful enough to suggest that there's a trend that's not helpful, and I doubt that most people think it will improve all by itself, so.
Yes, folks can come to their own conclusion.
Exactly.
It's not the information.
Okay. We did have some discussion around the notion of whether we provide, I'll just mention it now, I think it's more related to the appropriation. And Senator White, you brought it up. So let's wait till we get to the appropriation section and we'll talk about how we indicate an interest in maximizing our opportunity to use federal funds to do the work. So let's continue on in section 25.
So section 25 is a session law provision creating the study committee. This is on page 8, line 12. There is created the Building Energy Code Study Committee to recommend strategies for increasing compliance with the RVs and the CDs. Membership. The committee shall have 15 members with applicable expertise to include program design and implementation, building code administration and enforcement, and Vermont's construction industry. The Speaker of the House shall appoint 3 members, including up to 1 legislator. The Committee on Committee shall appoint 2 members, including up to 1 legislator. The remaining committee members shall be as follows. On page 9, the Commissioner of Public Service or designee, Director of Fire Safety or designee, a representative of Efficiency Vermont, a representative of the American Institute of Architects Vermont, a representative of the Vermont Builders and Remodelers Association, a representative of the Burlington Electric Department, a representative of the Vermont Gas Systems, a representative of the Association of General Contractors of Vermont, a representative of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and a representative from the Regional Planning Commission. Powers and duties. The commission shall consider and recommend strategies to increase awareness of and compliance with the RVs and the CDs, including designation of the Division of Fire Safety in the Department of Public Safety as a statewide authority having jurisdiction for administration, interpretation, and enforcement in conjunction with the department's existing jurisdiction over building codes. Assistance. The committee shall have the administrative, technical, and legal assistance of the Department of Public Service. The department shall hire a third-party consultant to assist and staff the committee. On to page 10. On or before December 1st, 2023, the committee shall submit a written report to the General Assembly with its findings and recommendations for legislative action. Meetings. The Department of Public Service shall call the first meeting of the committee to occur on or before July 15, 2023. The committee shall elect a chair from among the members of the first meeting. A majority of the membership shall constitute a quorum. The final meeting shall be held on or before October 31st, 2023, and the committee shall cease to exist on December 1st, 2023. Commission compensation and reimbursement. For attendance at meetings during adjournment of the General Assembly, a legislative member of the committee serving in the legislative capacity shall be entitled to per diem compensation. Payment shall be made from monies appropriated. Other members of the committee who are not otherwise compensated by their employer shall be entitled to per diem compensation and expenses as permitted in 32 VSA 1010 for not more than 6 meetings. So this is a 6th meeting study committee to occur between July and October, with a report due December 2023.
Great. I like the crisp, clear definition of start, stop, cease to exist, limit of meetings. And a timely report well before the beginning of the next session, so if drafting requests are going to emerge out of that report, it gives legislative council a month head start. Okay, any committee questions on that part?
Richie used to tell us what would happen to study committees like this when appropriations gets they peel them out of the door.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I mean, we will have to make a case to our colleagues down the hall. Given the upside of the opportunity to have an environmental and an energy and an economic points of view, I'd be happy to make a case that we should figure out how to have higher levels of code. Personally. All right. section 25A.
On page 11, section 25A, as an appropriation, the sum of $125,000 is appropriated from the general fund to the Department of Public Service in 2024 for the purpose of hiring a consultant and to pay the committee members for the compensation.
Senator White, so you had some thoughts around the appropriation language.
Yes, I had some thoughts related to, it was on page 8, section 5, I think is what might be the section that you're referring to. Line 6.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it could be either, I don't know if we, so let's go over the thinking and then council can help us put it in the right place.
Is this response? So what I was hoping to see, which we had with the addition of H332 in the bill, I was hoping that we could make a comment around, can we move forward with this in the instance that there's federal or grant money available? There was a line actually that Scott had said when he was, Representative Campbell said when he was here, that I didn't write down. But I like how it's called out here around what the funding would be already for federal, but I don't think that's enough. If that's what was the suggestion, I think it would be good to have something in addition.
Okay, so our council drafted S5 appropriations amendment, I believe, and there was language added when S5 went through approach about maximizing the use of federal funds if available, something like that. Remember that language was, I think, a single new sentence that Senator Kitchell requested. Basically said, let's try to maximize our ability to receive federal funds to support the work anticipated. I don't know if we could get federal funds in time to support this, and it might displace the need, might eliminate the need or reduce the need for an appropriation, but
Yeah, that's exactly my point, yeah.
might we get a grant that pays instead of making the appropriation. So, how
Is
about-
that?
well, so we could be adding a sentence, that's comparable to what we had in S5. So how about this? We are gonna, I think, I don't know, we haven't actually requested any changes. We have.
So
we-
we do need to change. We need to change section 24 of the bill, or section 21 of the bill to reflect the moved up date for the enhanced education bylaws. And you did just ask me to strike a sentence.
Right, okay, right, thanks. I was trying to think of procedurally what we might bring when. So let's pause and step away from this question about how do we express a desire to maximize the state's ability to receive funds, and can you the overall construct of supporting a study committee to build a report to help us figure out how to improve commercial building energy code compliance and residential building energy code compliance. As committee supportive of that effort, or inclusion of this in amendment 3.1. Okay, so we have 4 yeses now. So we have 5 yeses on including the final instance, well, not the final instance, this instance of amendment, the 6th instance of amendment. My hope is that in order to be able to vote this today by noon, that we would ask, we'll have a rate. The schedule is, I've been asked to, the chair and vice chair have been asked to join the pro tem and the chair and vice chair of economic development to just have a final conversation about the proposed amendment prior to bringing it to the vote. And so I would like to, one, pause in a few minutes to have that brief meeting. And two, while that's going on, ask council to make the changes that we asked for. So with that, can you review the changes we've requested thus far? There was.
I wouldn't mind, I would like to talk about two other potential things. What about the effective dates that I was talking about earlier? Which I think maybe we talk about that anyway, it's the 7th
Right.
instance. And then I'm willing to be in the minority on this, but I would at least like to talk about the appeals that Mayor Weinberger brought up in the enhanced distribution part. It doesn't take so long. And maybe it will, so maybe we should, but I will leave that to your discretion.
So, all right, so let's corral these all together. The edits we're asking for thus far are, we need to go through the 17 sets of amendments, but can you remind us of what we've requested changes on thus far?
You just asked to strike the sentence on page 8, line 4.
Yep.
And additionally, the 7th instance of amendment changed the effective date for the enhanced designation program from January 1, 2024 to January 1, 2025. So under S100 currently, the NRB has until January 1, 2024 to draft the model bylaws. So because you're pushing out the effective date of that program, I thought part of the reasoning was that you want to wait till the model bylaws are done, so you may want those two dates to match. They don't have to if you don't want to, but they probably may be good to match.
Yes, well, this is, we're editing.
Senator Watson pointed that out, I was just saying.
Yeah, as we work, so.
The date change you recommended, so we do have that in there, is that, or am I misunderstanding?
not.
It's the opposite. Oh, so that's not what the 7th instance of amendment
The
is.
7th instance of amendment is only the effective date, it's not the date by which the bylaws need to be finished.
Okay, so we would need to match that. Okay, I'm understanding
And
now.
I would keep the 2024 bylaw, deadline and model bylaw deadline, and then. So I would, yeah.
Oh, it's strike the 7th instance of amendment?
Yeah, that's what
Well, but in at least version 1.1, it says in section 44, the effective dates for the enhanced litigation sections, it takes effect 2025.
Yeah.
So I would, for the bylaws part, I would move to 2024.
So,
Maybe I'm confused.
yeah,
Sorry.
so in S100 as introduced, section 21.
Oh, as introduced. Right.
Yeah, so section 21, which is on page 29, it dictates that the NRB shall publish the model bylaws to be used in the enhanced designation process by January 1, 2024. Your amendment, both draft 1.1 and 2.2, are recommending pushing out the effective date of all of this until 2025. So when do you want the enhanced designation program to take effect?
Sooner, yeah.
And so if we match up those dates,
Yeah.
they publish them on 2024. The program will be in effect in 2024. There would still be an application process for it.
And so by striking the 7th instance of amendment, we keep the original from the as introduced. Yeah, so, okay, I'm clear now.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're good.
In section 44, effective dates, right, now January 1, 2024.
Okay, so we're not striking, because that does do what you want.
Right, the original.
Right, I'm gonna slow down and make sure I have these cross references right. We're amending the those introduced, so the cross references are them. In section 44, which is effective dates of those introduced, we have January 1, 2024 currently, and it applies only to the enhanced designation section, correct? Okay. And this, if we.
If you'd like to maintain S 100 as introduced, you would not amend this section.
Right, so the December one, I only see one instance of,
That's right, because in section 21 is where the other date is.
I'm looking at draft one, not following my own. So if we remove this entirely, we let the original dates stand, which we had in draft one pushed to 25, now we're returning to the original underlying date. Slow down. Right. Okay, so then we would remove the 7 instances. Okay. So that's the total sum of the proposed changes. Did you have something else you wanted to raise?
Yes, well, I'm interested in.
So, sorry, but we need to sort of, are you asking for something in regards to federal funding in the 6th instance of amendment?
Yeah, so I thought if we could pause during the
Okay, we're gonna
break,
think about that?
if during the break, you could look at, I don't have it in
Well,
front
so
of me.
I understand what you're asking for, but that's not really how appropriations work. So if you have a couple of options on how to do this. You could go forward with the appropriation that's already in there. If the department is awarded $125,000 and then doesn't use it because they've gotten a grant, it would revert potentially during the budget adjustment process. Or, so I guess I'm wondering, like, are you forbidding them from getting an appropriation if they get federal funding? Or are you seeking to not have any appropriation because they're gonna get a federal funding?
My take on this was all we're trying to do is encourage them to receive federal funds to the extent possible.
So who's the they?
The department.
The department.
But that, since that's a highly speculative thing to do, a grant application will be going in, Professor Campbell indicated, in 1 week, that's it to do. So we won't know the fate of that grant application conceivably till after we've adjourned. So the bill that says we will support the effort to an appropriation. But meanwhile, there's language in the findings supporting the notion of that the code compliance plan should include contingency for potential funding. Senator White, is that?
If that is, if, I think that the main reason I've heard from folks that they wanted to see language around federal funding was because of the potential for that federal funding to come in and maybe give a little bit of relief to the idea that this is not just us putting $125,000 towards the study, just because, but we are in fact anticipating something. Since we don't have that answer yet, and you have it in the findings, I'm very comfortable not requesting that legislative council draft something on this. But if it comes up in appropriations, I think it would be helpful for us to note that we did have this conversation.
Sure, okay.
Okay, because my other suggestion, I guess, would be to change the language on page 10 in the compensation and reimbursement section, line 17. With these payments for the per diems. No. Although maybe it should be right there, but money is appropriated from the General Assembly or the grant money is received.
Yeah. Okay, so are you suggesting something on its or from grant funds if available?
Yes.
Okay, which would leave the balance to revert. Is that something we can consider and add for our next draft? Sure, okay. All right, for that suggestion. me from, I'm running on my copy from grant fund if available, but you may want to phrase that differently. It's really flagging the concept on my copy. Anything else? Is that clear enough for you, or do you have questions for us about it?
No, that's fine.
Okay, great. So doubling back then to Senator Watson.
Yeah, thanks. I am interested in the enhanced designation section, potentially removing subsection E, which is the appeal,
Give
so.
us a page number.
Yeah, for sure. Are you in the introduced bill or?
As introduced.
As introduced, it's on page 28. It starts on line 3. If it's draft 1.1, then it's on page 30. So it's just the section B, it says municipalities are being checked by the NRB.
So we have we modified a right to appeal earlier by naming sort of a particularized interest. I don't know if that's a suitable way of narrowing it. Sounded of concern to the mayor in particular that any interested person, and I don't know if we're, so let's
So-
find out what the law really says here.
Well, so this defines interested person in a narrower way than other places. So it's, an interested person is either a person owning property in the designated area or abutting the designated area. The municipality making the application or an adjacent municipality or a regional planning commission. It is not the same definition as we've discussed in other areas of law.
So given that, whatever, the ABC explanation of who an interested person is, does that leave you wanting to add further specificity to, so as persons, as in regular persons that we're used to thinking about, they have to own title to or occupy property within or abutting the designated area.
I think particularly because of 2A, anybody within the owns property within the designated area, I think that is a very likely category
Sure.
folks to some object.
Okay, and so just for the sake of clarity, are you saying you'd like to make it more specific or more narrow, or that narrowing is sufficient?
I think I'd like to make it more narrow.
Okay, so do you have an idea, or council, do we have other ways that we further constrain the ability of someone to appeal?
Maybe before I make a suggestion, I'm curious if anybody else is interested in this. If not, then I'm not passionate.
My own take is, I mean, I'm sensitive to the point. The mayor was very sensitive to the point. You were once a fellow mayor.
Yes.
You've been through an appeal process. I think my take is, given where we are, and that there's a whole development process for creating such a program, that we could revisit this down the line. If we want to say they should be further constrained. So how about we leave it at that? We will see this bill again, for sure. How about if we leave it that you and interested members of the committee can continue the conversation, and once the bill comes back, which it will, or a version, that we would then revisit the question. But meanwhile, we have time, we will buy us time to do more. Okay, all right. So, well, it's a step for the moment. Thank you very much for your flexibility. So council, if you could, oh,
I
sorry.
apologize, Sen- I know Senator McCormick had his hand up.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
When does the chair intend to take up the issue of the umbrella program?
It's included in the, no, sorry. I had,
It's in draft 1.1, it is not in draft 2.2.
thank you for raising that question. I had, my own thinking was that we, although there's some overlap between what would be achieved by one program versus the other, that we were going to promote them both and let the process unfold and they be it one over the other or both proceed. So I had it's hard to see something that's not there. Thank you for flagging that. If in addition to making the changes requested, if you could restore the section of the master permit links, that would be helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Senator White. Thank you, Senator McCormick. Okay, so we'll add that back in. With that, council, so you have changes to make, so what is a reasonable time for us to reconvene to walk through that next draft? Is 11, well, let me say, is 11:30 adequate time for you to make?
Oh, yeah, I thought you were getting 5 minutes.
Okay, so we haven't had a break this morning, so between the meeting in the Pro Tem's office that the vice chair and I need to attend, and your redrafting, let's plan on giving ourselves a full half hour